Stephen Moffat's first story of Doctor Who... No, I'm not on about that one, I'm on about this one. You know, that really iconic story that would frighten children out of their wits until this... I mean, these guys came along? Wait, what do you mean he runs the whole show now? Like, took over from Russell? Wow, holy fuck, the series must be phenomenal with him at the helm. I mean, he wrote so many good stories. Oh no, God almighty, what on earth is this? Oh God, okay, stop. I've had enough now. Okay, let's go back to a better time, where Stephen Moffat was the oppressed before becoming the oppressor, and delve into a story that would give a whole new meaning behind the phrase, hiding behind the sofa.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin.
The episode explodes onto TV screens with an exciting chase sequence with some quick cuts and thrilling music. The opening scene brings up so many questions, triggering curiosity to what kind of horrors are stored inside this tube in the space-time continuum. I really love the pair's conversation about being a flashy high-tech time traveller, where the Doctor would rather use the old-fashioned method of just asking about for directions, and Rose demands something more futuristic. This topic of conversation reminds me of how the biggest technologies were really coming to the mainstream at the time. Mobile phones, the internet, so I can certainly see why Rose would be arguing this point across. But at the same time, I can also see the Doctor's point of view, where doing a little bit of simple investigation might help out a bit more. This point is almost completely trampled on though, when the Doctor gets onto the stage and asks if anything has fallen from the sky recently, showing that perhaps sonic tech may have been the better alternative, and maybe would have prevented this separation from Rose. Speaking of which, I find it very odd that upon seeing the rope, Rose doesn't even attempt to see where it has come from. Why on earth would you begin climbing a rope if you didn't even know where it was attached to? You can see it clear as bloody daylight! Anyway, Rose's sensitive motherly instincts get the better of her and begins to float over the city of London. This sequence is pretty cool in terms of spectacle. This shot here looks absolutely gorgeous. I reckon the special effects department probably took some lessons from the 2000 HBO war drama Band of Brothers, especially with those planes flying past us like that. It looks bloody stunning. The scene works really well in a comedic way too, considering it makes a direct reference to Rose's t-shirt choice in the previous scene. Oh, now you decide to make sure your companion is safe. Not before you go inside the nightclub, not before you give your speech about things falling from the sky. Nah, just as she's flying away, clinging for her dear life. Good one, Doc. I didn't realise she'd pissed you off that much in the previous episode.
I did it again. I picked another stupid ape.
Eccleston's northern accent reaches its peak when the phone rings.
Ring it, ring it, ring it, ring it, ring it.
And for some reason, Nancy disappears out of thin air for no other reason than to begin building the suspense. Don't get me wrong, I think the setup of the phone ringing is fantastic. The dark setting, the music, even the low-end rumbles of distant bombs falling and the subtle shots of Nancy being out of focus as the Doctor approaches his machine build up this sequence really well. Then the second time we hear the "Are you my mummy" phrase calls out from within the phone. Even the Doctor's confused, a recipe for trouble if I've ever seen one. This sequence makes the child on the roof earlier seem even more eerie than initially thought, as there wasn't as much of a haunting atmosphere at that point. The bickering Cockney duo of the year then come along and amuse us for a few moments before we're introduced to Captain Jack Pervert, who sets off to rescue Rose. I think John Barrowman does a decent job at portraying his character, but it feels like this role was very much written for him and nobody else. When I've seen John performing or presenting on TV, his personality doesn't seem to stray very far from the character we see in the show. Not that I really have much of a problem with this, a lot of actors do embrace their personality when performing. It's just something that I've noticed over the years, and I think I'd have a lot more respect for the guy if he wasn't just pure eye candy for homosexuals and middle-aged women. When Nancy begins rallying up the children to the house, I find myself thinking that she must be some kind of superhuman. Yes, I do mean that in the literal sense. One minute she's disappearing from plain sight without making a sound, and then manages to whistle rather loudly with gloves on. Did nobody think this through? I even googled if it was possible to whistle with gloves on, and the most bizarre results come up. How to use a first aid kit. What? How is that relevant to my search? youth baseball drills, how to make a bagpipe from latex. What fucking part of the internet am I on? Right, sorry. I got a bit sidetracked there. Where were we? Oh yeah, Nancy. Bombs being dropped right now. The family could come back into the house at any minute, and you're telling them to wait until you've carved the turkey? The doctor comes along to get the party started in a rather comedic way before finding out about all the starving children of London seeking refuge and sustenance within the middle-class households. The comedy of Marxism in action is then grounded to a halt as the gas-masked child rattles on the door. Interesting that it comes around just as the doctor pulls out the picture of the bomb he was chasing through time too. It's little edits like this that make this episode very rewatchable. The scene then becomes something twisted and contorted through some fantastic cinematography. The lack of music also makes a very intense viewing experience, and gets even worse as all the appliances begin to chant "Are you my mummy?" too. The child then disappears as the doctor opens the door. I can excuse this teleportation, however, as the child is a supernatural being. He can activate all those appliances and God knows what other abilities the nanogenes granted him. Jack then shows Rose around his spaceship and treats her like every lady would like to be, and explains the premise of his plan to her. I think the pair bounce off each other really well, especially seeing how Jack uses his charms, seduction and good looks to make a mean amount of dosh, even if it means altering the human form to something that it isn't, potentially endangering the entire human race with that. The episode does a fantastic job of reminding us that this infection is spreading throughout the city, even if first-time viewers don't know it yet, through the blurry POV shots and eerie sounds that come hand in hand with this scary child with a gas mask. This then comes into play fantastically in the episode's ending when the child corners Nancy with the low piano keys striking fear into the audience. When the doctor arrives at Albion Hospital, the same one that the pig was examined in Aliens of London, so they could probably reuse the set, I imagine, we have this marvellous long take of the doctor checking out the room. The colour scheme is almost identical to that of when he answers the phone earlier in the episode, unsettling the audience and making the doctor look very isolated as the camera tracks further and further away, almost being dragged into the darkest corners of the room where danger lurks. What then follows is one of those great moments that is unlikely for children to forget about. The pacing of the scene works so fantastically, from the doctor frantically trying to understand why all the patients have the same wounds right up until Constantine's transformation. What works absolutely beautifully, however, is how little we know about these people, monsters, creatures, infected zombies even. This is what makes them and the transformation so terrifying. A human's lack of understanding may scare him or her. Alongside this, those that may identify with our main character are unable to do so, purely because they are just as confused and bewildered as the Doctor, which is fantastically terrifying. The episode's conclusion is absolutely magnificent. The lack of information we have about what is going on due to the characters who have something to hide now being put in danger really pushes an audience member to tune in next week to find out what on earth is going on. The fast cutting between the gas mask people, the trippy POV shots of our protagonists, and the gradually increasing zooms and close-ups work really well in bumping up the tension to its peak until BAM! The episode ends. Bravo. Why on earth would you begin climbing a rope if you don't even know what it's attached to? That was shit. Then the second time we hear the "Are you my mummy?" phrase calls out from within the bollocks. Whenever I've seen Jack, I mean John performing... Why have I written that? When Nancy is not a Nazi. Especially not a northern Nazi. Oh, I've put whilst instead of whistle. The Doctor came along... No, he didn't. What have I written here? The Doctor comes along to get the party started in a rather... Oh, I've put the party there. I need to say that better.